One song, 90 seconds, a crowd of 200 people turning against a teenager who had never performed alone before. Tina Turner remembered every face in that room, especially one. It was the spring of 1958, and Anna Mae Bullock was 19 years old. She had been in St. Louis for less than a year, having come up from Nutbush, Tennessee with her sister Ellen to find something bigger than what the fields and the small church choir back home could offer. She had found Ike Turner's band, the Kings of Rhythm, and she had found her voice, or rather, the voice had found her, the way it always does when the thing inside a person finally meets the right room and the right microphone and the right permission to come out. But on this particular night, none of that mattered yet. The Club Imperial was a music venue on West Florissant Avenue that seated 200 people on a good night and smelled permanently of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. It was the kind of room that had seen everything: good musicians, bad musicians, brawls, breakups, the whole churning mess of a city's nightlife. And its crowds reflected that. They were not forgiving crowds. They were crowds that had paid for something and expected to receive it. And if they didn't receive it, they let you know immediately and without diplomacy. Ike Turner was supposed to perform that night. His name was on the marquee. 200 people had come to see him, and his band played the kind of electric driving rhythm and blues that had made him a fixture on the St. Louis scene. What they had not come to see was a teenage girl they'd never heard of, standing alone at the center microphone while the band played behind her. Ike had decided, 2 hours before showtime, that Anna Mae should open the set. Not as a feature, as a test. He had heard her sing, had recognized something in her that he wanted to use, but he had not told her she would be performing alone that night. He told her 20 minutes before she went on. He told her the song. He told her to go. She went. The trouble began before she finished the first chorus. It didn't start as booing. It started as the particular silence that falls over a crowd when they decide they're not interested. A silence that is louder in its way than any noise. People turned back to their drinks. Conversations resumed. A woman near the back laughed at something her companion said, loudly enough to be heard over the music. The 200 people in the Club Imperial collectively decided that this girl was not what they had paid for, and they communicated that decision in the efficient, brutal way that crowds have when they feel cheated of the thing they came for. She was too young, some of them thought, too uncertain on her feet, not yet the performer she would become. The one who would own every stage she ever walked onto, as if the stage itself had been built specifically for her arrival. In 1958, she was still becoming that person. The voice was there. Everything else was still being assembled. Then someone, a man in the third row, heavyset in a gray suit, a local promoter named Gerald Thorne, who fancied himself a tastemaker and had strong opinions about what belonged on a stage and what didn't, started it, not with words, with a single sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the music and landed on Anna Mae like something physical, the sound of a verdict. Others followed. Within 30 seconds, the booing was general. She stood there and took it. All 90 seconds of it until the song ended. She did not stop singing mid-song. She did not walk off early. She finished every word of every line, her voice steady in the way that voices are steady when the person using them has made a decision about who they are that a crowd of 200 strangers cannot unmake. The band played. She sang. The room told her she was nothing. When the song ended, she walked off stage, and the bartender who was working that night, a man named Douglas Freeman, who would tell this story for the rest of his life, said that he had never seen anyone walk off a stage the way she did. Head up, shoulders back, not a single tear. Behind the curtain, she sat down on the equipment case and put her hands in her lap and stared at the floor for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and went back to watch the rest of the show from the side of the stage. Ike Turner never apologized for putting her on without warning. That was not how Ike operated. But 2 weeks later, he put her on again, this time announced, this time as a feature, and the room responded differently. The voice that the Club Imperial had dismissed on a Tuesday night in spring became, over the years that followed, one of the most recognizable voices in the world. Anna Mae Bullock became Tina Turner. And she did not forget the Club Imperial. She did not forget the silence before the booing, the man in the third row, or the specific quality of being told by a room full of people that you don't belong there. She kept it. Not as a wound, she would say this later, and the distinction mattered to her, but as information. The night she was booed off the Club Imperial stage at 19 told her something important about who she was. It told her that she could stand inside the worst thing a crowd could do to a performer and come out the other side still standing, still singing, head up. It told her something else too, something that took longer to articulate but that she carried just as carefully, that the people doing the booing are rarely the final word on anything. They are loud and they are present, and in the moment they feel absolute. But they are not the future. They are just a room on a particular night making a particular noise. The future is the girl who finishes the song anyway. That knowledge had a value she never stopped drawing on. 20 years passed. The world changed around Tina Turner in the way it changes around people who are willing to outlast everything that tries to stop them. There had been Ike, and what Ike had meant, the music and the violence and the years of surviving both. There had been hits and hard years, and the slow rebuilding of something that had been systematically damaged. There had been nights when the only reason she kept going was that stopping felt like giving the wrong people the satisfaction. By 1978, she was 40 years old and still fighting, still performing, still carrying a voice that had somehow come through everything intact, scarred maybe, but intact the way things are intact when they have been tested so many times that the testing itself has become part of what they are. She was backstage at a theater in St. Louis, a larger theater now, a different room from the Club Imperial, a room that held not 200 but 2,000, when someone knocked on her dressing room door between the sound check and the show. Her assistant opened it. The man in the doorway was older than she remembered. The gray suit had been replaced by something more careful, more considered. The hair was thinner, the face heavier, but she knew him immediately. 20 years had not changed the specific shape of a face that had been the first to tell her, in the most public way available, that she was nothing. Gerald Thorne stood in the doorway of Tina Turner's dressing room and asked if she had a moment. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Come in." What happened in that room over the next 40 minutes has been described by Tina Turner in various interviews over the years, always in the same general terms, always with the same quality of someone reporting a fact rather than settling a score. Gerald Thorne had not come to apologize exactly, or rather, he had come to apologize. But that was not the most important thing he had come to do. He had come because his daughter wanted to be a singer. She was 17. She had a voice, he said, that reminded him of something he hadn't been able to name for years until recently, when he finally understood what it reminded him of. She'd been singing at a school recital, and he had heard her, and something had happened to him that he didn't have words for. A kind of recognition, a kind of shame, a kind of reckoning with a night 20 years ago when he had used his voice to silence someone else's. He wanted to know if Tina Turner would listen to his daughter sing. She sat across from him and let him finish. She did not make it easy for him, in the way that people who have earned their composure do not hand it out for free. But she let him finish. Then she said something that Gerald Thorne repeated to his daughter that night, and that his daughter repeated in an interview 30 years later, and that passed in this way through time, like all the things people say when they finally get something exactly right. She said, "A voice doesn't care who tried to stop it. It just keeps going until someone lets it out." She agreed to listen to the girl. Gerald Thorne's daughter, whose name was Patricia, came to a sound check 2 days later and sang for Tina Turner in an empty theater with no audience and no pressure, and every good reason to believe that the woman listening to her understood exactly what it cost to stand in a room and open your mouth and hope. Patricia Thorne had a real voice, not a voice in the making, not potential, a voice that was already something. Tina Turner listened to her sing 2 songs and then told her so directly, the way she had been told nothing at 19, the way she had wished someone would tell her before the Club Imperial had to do it the hard way. She connected Patricia with a vocal coach in St. Louis who had trained some of the best singers to come out of the city. She called in a favor. She made sure the door was open. Patricia Thorne spent the next decade building a career as a session vocalist and later as a choral director at a music school in Chicago. She was not a star. She was something else, A serious musician who passed what she knew to other people, including a number of students who went on to careers of their own. The chain of it. The way one open door makes room for the next one. Tina Turner never performed at the Club Imperial again. The building was demolished in the mid-1970s, replaced by something forgettable. But she drove past the block once, years later, and thought about the girl who had stood on that stage and finished the song while the room told her to stop. She thought about what it had cost her, and she thought about what it had given her, the specific, unshakable knowledge that she could survive the worst a room could do and walk off with her head up. She thought about the 19-year-old girl who had stood there and taken every second of it, and she felt something that was not quite pride and not quite grief, but lived somewhere between the two. Gratitude, maybe, for the girl who had not walked off early, for the girl who had finished the song. There is a version of the story where Tina Turner closes the dressing room door on Gerald Thorne, where 20 years of hard living has made her unwilling to extend herself to the man who started the booing on a Tuesday night in 1958. Nobody would blame her. The debt between them ran in one direction and had been collecting interest for 2 decades. But that is not what she did. What she did was let him in and listen, and say the thing that needed to be said, not to him, but through him, to his daughter, to every person who has ever stood in a room and been told by the noise of it that they don't belong there. A voice doesn't care who tried to stop it. It just keeps going until someone lets it out. Tina Turner knew this better than anyone. She had learned it at 19, in 90 seconds, in front of 200 people who had made up their minds before she finished the first chorus. She had carried that knowledge through everything that came after, through Ike, through the hard years, through the comeback that the industry kept telling her wouldn't happen. She carried it all the way to a dressing room in St. Louis in 1978, where a man in a better suit than the one he'd worn 20 years ago stood in her doorway and asked for something she didn't owe him. She gave it anyway, not for him, for the girl behind him who needed to hear that her voice was real. That is what it looks like when someone takes the worst night of their life and turns it into something useful, not forgetting. Not pretending it didn't happen, just deciding that the thing that tried to break you is going to end up serving the people who come after you instead. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories about the human beings behind music's greatest legends. And if you've ever had someone try to silence something real in you, tell us about it in the comments. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss one of these stories.